Russia's strategic connection to the Baltic region has been dealt a severe blow as Europe officially cuts off all railway routes between Kaliningrad and Moscow. This dramatic move, described by analysts as a turning point in the region's security landscape, has sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. Kaliningrad, Russia's isolated military hub, now stands more cut off than at any point in modern history. Europe's decision to completely cut railway links connecting Kaliningrad to mainland Russia represents one of the most consequential geopolitical moves in recent years, a step that immediately reshapes the strategic landscape of the Baltic region. What makes this development so striking is not just the scale of the disruption, but the message it sends, a powerful signal that Europe is willing to escalate economic and logistical pressure in a way that directly challenges Moscow's ability to operate freely in its own sphere of influence. The cutoff effectively severs a logistical artery that Russia has relied on for decades, impacting everything from routine commerce to high-level military coordination. And the most alarming question now emerging across global political circles is simple yet unsettling. What does Russia do next? And how far could this confrontation go? The sudden halt of all railway transportation has not only frozen commercial routes, but has also disrupted a complex network of supply chains that feed into Kaliningrad's functioning as a highly militarized and strategically critical exclave. The region has long served as Russia's forward operating base in Europe, hosting advanced missile systems, command centers, and naval assets, all of which rely on predictable transport links to maintain operational readiness. By shutting these links down, Europe has introduced a level of vulnerability that Moscow did not anticipate at this stage of regional tensions. This is why the move is being described by several European diplomats as decisive, while Russian analysts call it nothing short of a calculated choke point. The stakes clearly have been raised behind closed doors. European policymakers insist the decision is grounded in security, framed as a protective measure against expanding Russian military movements. However, that explanation only scratches the surface. There is growing consensus among intelligence officials that cutting these routes is also a preemptive strategy, one meant to reduce Russia's logistical flexibility and limit its ability to project power into the Baltic Sea region. At the same time, however, the EU is carefully monitoring the potential responses this bold action could provoke. Russia, known for reacting strongly to moves it considers existential or strategically humiliating, now faces a dilemma: respond forcefully and risk escalation with NATO-aligned states, or absorb the pressure and seek alternative channels that may require costly political concessions. What makes the situation even more volatile is the psychological impact of this severing. It signals to Moscow that Europe is moving beyond symbolic sanctions and entering a phase of direct infrastructural pressure, an escalation that could reshape future confrontations. And as global observers watch closely, a powerful question echoes through diplomatic circles. Has Europe just drawn a line that Moscow cannot afford to ignore, or crossed one that could trigger a reaction far greater than anticipated? Russia's swift and forceful condemnation of Europe's railway shutdown as an unprecedented blockade reflects not only its anger, but its deep strategic anxiety over what this move truly represents. Moscow's choice of language is intentional. Words like a blockade, a provocation, and a hostile escalation are designed to send a clear warning to European capitals. This is more than a logistical interruption. It is an attack on Russia's geopolitical reach and regional authority. The reaction inside the Kremlin is intense, as officials view the cutoff not just as an inconvenience, but as a direct assault on the sovereignty and stability of Kaliningrad, one of Russia's most militarized and symbolically significant territories. And as political tension builds, one question begins to dominate international discussions. S-restaurant. Is this the moment Russia decides enough is enough? Russian state media is already amplifying the narrative that Europe's decision is a coordinated attempt to strangle its exclave and weaken Moscow's influence in the Baltic region. Analysts close to the Kremlin argue that the timing is no coincidence. With strained relations already at a boiling point, they believe Europe is exploiting a window of vulnerability, using infrastructure pressure as a weapon to test Russia's thresholds. This perception is crucial because it shapes how Moscow may respond: defensively, aggressively, or unpredictably. Senior Russian officials have warned of serious and irreversible consequences. Language that often precedes concrete countermeasures, whether diplomatic, economic, or even military. Thus, could this be the pressure point that triggers a dramatic Russian retaliation? That is the fear now spreading across European policy circles. Behind the scenes, Russia's Security Council is evaluating alternative supply routes to Kaliningrad, but none offer the direct, reliable, and politically uncontested access that the European rail corridor once provided. This creates a dilemma that strikes at the core of Moscow's strategic posture. Responding too softly risks appearing weak on the international stage. Responding too forcefully risks clashing with NATO-affiliated states, a scenario with unpredictable and potentially dangerous outcomes. This balance of power is more fragile than it appears, and Russia knows that the world is watching closely to see whether its threats of consequences are rhetorical or real. European officials, meanwhile, remain braced for the possibility that Moscow may frame this incident as a red line violation. And that is where the geopolitical tension sharpens dramatically. Is Europe pushing Moscow toward a symbolic response, or provoking a confrontation that could reshape the entire Baltic security architecture? With Russia characterizing the shutdown as a blockade, the narrative is shifting rapidly from diplomatic disagreement to potential confrontation, leaving the international community wondering just how far Moscow is willing to go to defend what it now sees as an attack on its strategic dignity. The immediate supply chain disruptions unfolding in Kaliningrad following Europe's decision to shut down all railway links have created a climate of uncertainty that is spreading far beyond the reach of the Syrian's borders. Kaliningrad has always operated with a unique dependency, cut off geographically from mainland Russia, yet tightly integrated through critical transport routes that sustain its economy, energy systems, and military infrastructure. The abrupt halt of these routes has struck at the heart of this delicate balance, sending local authorities scrambling to assess shortages, reroute essential goods, and stabilize an economy that relies heavily on uninterrupted logistics. The situation exposes a harsh reality. When a strategic region is isolated overnight, even the smallest delay can trigger a chain reaction with far-reaching consequences. Commercial sectors across Kaliningrad are already reporting strain. Key industries dependent on imported materials, construction, energy distribution, and manufacturing are facing delays that could evolve into long-term operational challenges. Basic commodities, fuel supplies, and agricultural imports are particularly vulnerable, raising concerns of price hikes, reduced availability, and localized inflation. Businesses that once relied on predictable transit schedules are now forced to navigate uncertainty, with many warning that prolonged disruption could weaken the region's economic resilience. For a territory that functions as both a civilian hub and a military stronghold, this vulnerability has become more than just an economic issue. It is a strategic weakness that adversaries and allies alike are watching closely. But the civilian economy is only one part of the crisis. Kaliningrad's military infrastructure, among the most concentrated in Europe, is deeply reliant on consistent supply lines for equipment, fuel, maintenance parts, and personnel movement. Disruptions here risk undermining operational readiness, forcing Russia to consider alternative resupply methods that may be slower, riskier, or more politically provocative. This has raised alarms not only in Moscow, but also in NATO capitals, where intelligence agencies are monitoring any sign that Russia may attempt to compensate for the shutdown through forceful or unconventional means. Could the pressure on Kaliningrad's supply chain push Moscow toward new, high-stakes maneuvers? That question is quickly moving to the forefront of regional security discussions. Local residents feel the ripple effects too, as Kaliningrad's government issues warnings about potential shortages and urges calm amid rising public concern. The region's dependence on external goods has never been more visible. European policymakers argue that the disruptions are an unavoidable consequence of broader security measures, but inside Kaliningrad, the situation feels like a tightening vise. Each delayed shipment, each canceled delivery becomes another reminder of how precarious the exclave's position truly is. And as uncertainty deepens, observers wonder, is this just the beginning of a logistical struggle or the spark that ignites a larger geopolitical confrontation? European leaders continue to justify the railway cutoff as a necessary security measure, but behind the polished statements and diplomatic language lies a far more calculated and far-reaching strategy. Officials in Brussels, Vilnius, Warsaw, and other key European capitals frame the move as a defensive step, one designed to counter Russia's expanding military logistics and reduce the vulnerability of NATO's eastern flank. Yet the deeper implication is unmistakable. Europe is signaling that it is no longer willing to tolerate any logistical channels that could strengthen Moscow's influence or allow unmonitored military movement across the Baltic region. The decision is not simply about restricting cargo, it is about years redefining control, signaling resolve, and reshaping the balance of power in one of the most sensitive geopolitical theaters on the continent. European analysts argue that Russia's recent activities in the Baltic Sea, combined with its military posture in Kaliningrad, have elevated regional risks to a level that demands decisive action. The railway links once served as a lifeline connecting Russia to its heavily armed exclave, but they also represented a security blind spot, one that NATO members increasingly viewed as an unacceptable threat. By shutting down the routes, Europe has effectively disrupted a strategic corridor that Moscow relied on not only for supplies, but for projecting pressure across neighboring states. This shift, European officials claim, is meant to ensure that the region's security framework is no longer tilted in Russia's favor. But the question now being quietly debated across diplomatic halls is chilling. Has Europe strengthened its security or simply provoked a stronger, more unpredictable Russia? European policymakers insist the decision aligns with international law and existing security protocols, but the timing and coordination reveal a unified political stance unlike anything seen in recent years. The EU, often criticized for slow or fragmented responses, has in this instance acted swiftly and in near total agreement. This sends a powerful signal not just to Moscow but to the world that Europe is prepared to use infrastructure, economy, and regional access as tools of deterrence. The cutoff, therefore, becomes more than a policy decision. It becomes a strategic message of intent, and in geopolitics, messages often carry as much weight as actions themselves. Yet, beneath the measured tone of official announcements, European governments are fully aware of the risks. Restricting the supply routes to Kaliningrad may limit Russia's logistical freedom, but it also increases the chances of miscalculation, retaliation, or escalation. Intelligence agencies across Europe are preparing for cyber responses, trade pressure, or military signaling from Moscow. The atmosphere is tense, and the line between deterrence and provocation is dangerously thin, or stepping closer to a confrontation it may not be fully prepared for. That unsettling uncertainty is now shaping the geopolitical conversation as both sides brace for whatever comes next. NATO's decision to intensify violence across the Baltic following Europe's to Kaliningrad is not a regular sign or a pushing. It is a deliberate signal that preparing for every possible Moscow alliance is preparing for a possible reside. The increase in aerial patrols, naval monitoring, and intelligence coordination underscores a fundamental reality. When a major logistical artery between Russia and its most militarized exclave is severed, the risk of miscalculation rises sharply. NATO officials understand the gravity of this moment. They are not merely watching events unfold, they are actively shaping the strategic environment to ensure no sudden Russian counteraction catches the alliance off guard. And as these surveillance measures expand, one question looms large. Is NATO preparing for containment or bracing for confrontation? Member states bordering the Baltic Sea, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, and Estonia have heightened radar operations, increased reconnaissance flights, and intensified naval presence to ensure full situational awareness. These states know better than anyone that Kaliningrad's strategic significance makes it a potential flashpoint. Russia's missile systems stationed there, including advanced S-400 air defense units and Iskander ballistic missiles, mean the region is not just a military outpost but a forward, operating platform capable of projecting power deep into NATO territory. Any disruption to Kaliningrad's supply chain could lead Moscow to reposition assets, test airspace boundaries, or initiate military drills, actions that demand close NATO scrutiny to prevent escalation. This is why surveillance is not simply precautionary. It is a strategic shield designed to maintain stability in a rapidly shifting environment. Behind closed doors, NATO strategists are weighing scenarios ranging from cyber attacks and maritime provocations to attempts by Russia to re-establish alternative transport routes by force. Each scenario carries its own risks, and each requires a heightened intelligence posture to detect early signals. The alliance's surveillance expansion is therefore both defensive and preemptive. Defensive in the sense of protecting member states, and preemptive in anticipating movements that could alter the balance of power. But as NATO tightens its watch, analysts warn that such increased visibility can also amplify tensions, making even routine military movements appear threatening. This delicate balance makes the current situation exceptionally volatile. On the diplomatic front, NATO's public messaging emphasizes stability and monitoring, but private concerns are far more urgent. Officials fear that Russia, feeling cornered by Europe's railway cutoff and eager to reassert control over Kaliningrad, might engage in symbolic or tactical actions designed to test NATO's resolve. A single misinterpreted maneuver, an aircraft flying too close, a ship veering off course, a radar lock, could spiral into a crisis neither side intends. This is why the alliance is treating surveillance as a decisive tool. Visibility becomes deterrence, and preparedness becomes the only safeguard against unintended escalation. As NATO's eyes intensify on the Baltics, a broader question emerges across European and international security circles. Is this strengthened vigilance enough to maintain peace? Or does it signal that the region is entering its most dangerous phase in years? The answer may depend not on what NATO does next, but on how Moscow chooses to interpret this rapidly expanding shield of scrutiny. Analysts across Europe and beyond are now warning that the railway cutoff to Kaliningrad may become one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the Baltic region in over a decade, a development that could redefine the trajectory of Russia-Europe relations. This is not merely a transportation dispute, nor a routine policy clash. It is a direct intersection of strategic territory, military posture, and political signaling. When a heavily armed exclave like Kaliningrad is suddenly isolated, analysts know that the potential for escalation rises sharply. The region becomes a pressure chamber where every delay, every military movement, and every political statement carries heightened significance. And as the situation intensifies, one question begins to dominate expert discussions. Sirs, is this the moment when a logistical disruption transforms into a geopolitical crisis? Kaliningrad's unique geography makes it the perfect ignition point for a broader conflict. It is Russian territory trapped inside the European Union and NATO's borders, a heavily fortified node filled with missile systems, naval units, and intelligence networks. Analysts point out that for Moscow, allowing Kaliningrad to appear weak or cut off would be strategically unacceptable. This means Russia may feel compelled to respond, whether symbolically to save face or decisively to restore control. Such potential responses are what worry experts the most, because even a limited retaliatory move could trigger a rapid chain reaction. A cyber attack on European infrastructure, an aggressive military flyover in NATO airspace, or a naval maneuver in the Baltic Sea. Any of these could raise tensions to levels not seen since the Cold War. Could a single misstep push the region into a spiral that neither side intended? That possibility is driving growing alarm within defense circles. What makes this moment particularly volatile is the psychological and political framing on both sides. Europe sees the cutoff as a security measure. Russia frames it as a blockade and a deliberate provocation. Analysts warn that when narratives diverge this dramatically, misinterpretations become almost inevitable. And misinterpretations in geopolitics are often the spark that lights the fire. The Baltic Sea is already crowded with military exercises, surveillance operations, and naval deployments. Introducing heightened tensions into such an environment is like placing a lit match near dry tinder. Every aircraft radar lock, every cross-border accusation, every intercepted communication becomes magnified in importance. Observers also highlight the growing fear that Russia may attempt to reassert its access to Kaliningrad through coercive or unconventional methods. A forced corridor, a sudden military drill, or even a hybrid operation designed to destabilize the region. All are possibilities analysts are quietly discussing. Such moves would compel NATO to respond, raising the risk of direct confrontation. The region's proximity to multiple NATO members means that any escalation could escalate far faster than diplomatic channels can manage. Is this the beginning of a new standoff in the Baltic, a standoff with consequences far beyond the region itself? That is the question shaping every expert forecast as the world watches a fragile situation evolve into what may become the next major geopolitical storm. As Europe's decision reverberates through global power corridors, the eyes of the world now turn to Moscow. Will this cutoff remain a political standoff or ignite a deeper crisis in the Baltic region? The next 48 hours may define a new chapter in the Russia-Europe confrontation. Stay tuned